Well, welcome everybody. Great to have you here. So, we were going to start off. First of all, can everybody hear me? Absolutely. No, I'm going to stand back here. Now that's better, right? Is that better? Not entirely better? Now? Yeah, okay, I'll just hold it. How's that? Okay, that's the way to go. All right, I gotta have two devices in my hand. That's all right. So, we wanted to just get a sense of the people in the room, what your relationship to leadership transitions is. Have you ever been through one? Are you about to go through one? Are you in one now? So how many people have been through, in your company or organization, a leadership transition? Wow, a lot. How many of those people see another one coming in the future in the next 5 to 10 years? Quite a few. And how many people are in the middle of a leadership transition right now? Bunch of those too. And how many, aside from the ones that raised their hands before, anticipate a leadership transition in the next decade? So everybody is engaged in these things that we're talking about. I'm John Abrams from South Mountain Company, recently retired, Cindy Turcot, and we're going to talk about leadership transitions. So let me just do the propaganda. So I just retired 6 months ago after 50 years as the founder and CEO of South Mountain Company. And South Mountain is an integrated architecture, engineering, building and solar company on Martha's Vineyard. 40 employees. And the company has been, you might say it's been a triple bottom line company from the very beginning. That's what we thought, even though we did not know the word. And our guiding principles are very much aligned with people, profit, and planet. We started in New York in 1973, moved to Martha's Vineyard in 75, and have stayed there ever since as a very local business. But in 1986, two longtime employees came to me and said, we don't want to start our own businesses, we want to make our careers here, but we need more than an hourly wage. We need a stake. And that inspired an inquiry. At first, it was just, sure, I will make you minor partners, and we'll do that. But that inquiry turned up, and there were very few worker co-ops at the time, but those that we found were inspiring. And we decided to become a worker co-op, went to the Industrial Cooperatives Association, which many of you know now as the ICA group, but was in existence then. Attorney Peter Pittigoff worked with us to become, to transition to a worker co-op. And in 1995, Deirdre Bohan came to work. At that time, nobody had ever retired from South Mountain, and in fact, in the last 9 years, 12 people have retired who collectively represent about 350 years of employment. So it's a place where people build their careers. And Deirdre came as the bookkeeper and went through a succession of jobs. She would eventually become the CEO at the end of last year. But our ownership changed, but there's ownership transitions and leadership transitions as we know, are two separate things. They're often linked together, they often happen at the same time, but they absolutely don't need to, and often they don't. So in our case, it was a very early ownership transition, and the leadership transition would not happen for another 37 years. During that time, our first foray, so the decision-making had changed with the worker co-op. The owners were the board and always have been until recently, when 25 owners was, well, that's another story. But it was a pretty traditional, although very collaborative management structure until 2004, when I went on a sabbatical, and we spent about 6 months planning for that departure and putting into place a new system and a new structure. I went away. All our planning was to no avail. It was a miserable failure. And I came back, and not that anything terrible had happened, but it just hadn't worked. We'd identified the wrong people. We spent another 6 months thinking about that, working on that, and then I went away again. And when I returned from that second sabbatical, I went away to write a book, and then a second edition of that book. And when I returned from that sabbatical, the management system that we had put in place stayed in place, and stayed in place with very little change until the present day. Or it was really the precursor for the present day. But in 2014, we wrote the avalanche scenario, a continuity plan. What happens tomorrow if I get buried by an avalanche today? And that was the beginning of our real transition planning that would actually cover the next 9 years. And it was intermittent, it was episodic, but we started to think about, how does this really work as a co-op transitioning to the second generation? And it wasn't until 5 years later, in 2019, when this transition plan came to fruition. So during that time, we were always thinking, we never thought about an outside hire for CEO. We knew it would come internally, but we did not, there was no obvious person to take that role on. So for a long time, we thought about co-CEOs. We spent time talking to King Arthur, where they have a co-CEO model, and several other companies, and it really felt like we were on that path. But also developing was that we had a leadership team of 5 people that were phenomenally well aligned and very equal, and there didn't seem to be an obvious answer. We're not going to have 5 co-CEOs. And it occurred to me at that time, 2019, that Deirdre, who never wanted the job, who vehemently expressed that this was not her, this was not the kind of job for her, that she was not the right person to do this job, that she was the person for the job. And so this new concept surfaced of a first among equals CEO, with the 4 other people as her support, her leadership team. And it became, so I just proposed this, what did I just do? Turn it off.
Do you want to give it to me? I'll just keep talking.
So, and I expected with this proposal to get some pushback, at least some resentment, from those who were expecting to be part of that co-CEO team. She got it back.
Got it.
She's good. And there was none. Everybody felt that this was the right way to go. And the amazing part to me was that included Deirdre, who recognized, as all the rest of us did, that she really was the right person for the job. And she has proved to be an extraordinary leader. So that was the leadership team then. And this is a book that was pivotal for us. It's called Managing Transitions. And I want to just read a little piece of that. So it describes the stages of important transitions. Letting go of the old ways and the old identity people had is the first phase of transition. It's an ending, the time when you need to help people to deal with what's perceived as a loss. So 2019 was that for us, the acceptance of this new plan, the acceptance that it was actually going to happen because it had been clearly talked about, but this plan laid it out that on December 31st, 2022, the transition would be complete, I would be retired, the second generation would be, would have taken over. So the second phase is an in-between time when the old is gone but the new isn't fully operational. We call it the neutral zone. It's when the critical psychological realignments and repatternings take place. So our 3-year planning from 2019 to 2022 was actually that zone. And during that time, we completely changed the way we worked, and there was significant capacity building going on. I slipped into the background gradually. And actually, during the last 6 months, when I was still working full-time, it felt to me like the transition had happened already. It was over, and we were just polishing the mirror. So it was almost not so significant when we reached that date. But coming out of the transition and a new beginning is that third piece. This is when people develop the new identity, experience the new energy, and discover the new sense of purpose that makes the change begin to work. And that's what is happening now as people find their way. And the planning was spread out over such a long period of time, and it was so intentional and so relentless that it feels like it's just been seamless. And one of the outcomes of the planning process was that we actually changed our management system during it, and a very important part of this, certainly in a co-op, is the difference between policy and management and who does what, who decides what. So we have a very specific group of decisions that the owners make, and that's really all they make. And then we have very specific decisions that the board makes, and the board is a subset of the owners. And finally, the decisions that the leadership team makes. And it's been kind of, it obviously gets adjusted all the time, but it's been in play for so long that people are used to it. So that's what happened. I became, I work 4 hours a week. I serve on the board for 2 years. Then my connection to the company will be over, and this group has taken over, and they're just doing a phenomenal job together. During that time, when we were doing the transition, we were also intentionally building culture. And one of the biggest things I think that happened during that time was the creation of a path to ownership. And this is a 7-year path that employees begin on when they first come to South Mountain, the first day of work, and they work with a cohort and go through 35 different experiences over 7 years. First 5 are toward ownership, 5 is when ownership starts, and the next 2 are becoming owners. And so this, that we'd always done in a very ad hoc way, became institutionalized as the path to ownership. It was largely designed by Abby Zell. She led the effort, and she started as an intern and worked on this all the way for 5 years until she became an owner. And now she conducts it. So successioning is a word I use these days for the process by which small businesses transition beyond their original founder, transition from sole proprietorships to shared ownership, from top-down management to participatory democratic management, and from unprotected mission and guiding principles to perpetually preserved purpose. That's something that I think is very much in process with many businesses. Deirdre and I, at the time of the transition, and then there's what's next. So with this company, never again will it have a founder, a young founder who spends 50 years there. Deirdre is the CEO today and turned 56, I believe, and last year. So how long is she going to be there? 10 years, 15 years at most? So another part of this planning process has been the conscious building of Generation 3, because that next leadership transition will happen far sooner than the one before. So, and I have moved on to working with other co-ops, converting businesses to co-ops, and working on a book that that recognizes that there are right now in this country 3 million small businesses with founders over 55 that are all going to transition in some way in the next 20 years. It's been estimated that $10 trillion worth of assets will change hands, and private equity will be very interested in decimating some of these businesses. Many of them will just close their doors. And my question is, why can't the 30 or 40 million people that work in these 3 million businesses today provide the capital with sweat equity and reap the rewards? And I think they can. I think most owners do not know of the options that exist. And the fact of worker co-ops, ESOPs, employee ownership trusts, perpetual purpose trusts, there are so many corporate design models that people need to understand better, and that is the purpose of this book. So finally, what I want to say about the experience of the leadership transition is that the thing that we learned the most, I believe, from going through this so intensely is how to speak frankly, honestly, and openly with each other, and take that to new levels. A friend of mine says about organizations, he says, the health of organizations is inversely related to the number of undiscussables. If there are none, organizations are healthy. I think we kind of got to that place, and it was not without a lot of turmoil and trouble, but people realized that if we were going to do this thoroughly, we needed to speak honestly with each other. And the only advice that I would give to people going through a leadership transition is it is an adventure. It can be a joyous one. Enjoy that ride and do it thoroughly, because it really pays off. Question? We'll have discussion at the end after Cindy, but if there's any particular ones right now. Yes?
What are you doing now, or what's the company doing now to bring that third generation up to speed so when it's their turn, that they're ready?
So the first thing is that years ago, we learned, because in the early days, somebody would come in and say, I got a friend of mine is looking for a job. And we'd say, good person, come to work on Monday. Those people stayed for their careers, and they were hired unintentionally, and it mostly worked out okay. But there came a time when we recognized that and started to hire future owners. That was really what we were looking for as owners. We could train people, but we can't change people. So that has been in play for a long time, but recently with the consciousness that who are these third generation leaders going to be? And I think they're there now. So we're hiring them, and then this path to ownership is building leadership skills in all new employees. There was one back there.
So are some of the trials and tribulations, say, from the other 4 people who were CEO? Were those difficult conversations to have?
Well, I expected them to be very difficult, and they just weren't. They recognized that this, I think for them as much as for me, this had been a conundrum and a dilemma that who is it going to be? And yes, it can't be 5. So I think this was a solution that just resonated with everybody. I think we all kind of came to it at the same time. Yes?
I'd like to commend you for your advanced planning and foresight, and it feels like it really paid off. What I think is true is there are a lot of businesses that don't have business leaders who don't have that foresight or who are not focused as much on the future. What would you say is a method of encouraging more current leaders to have the kind of foresight and advanced planning that you would do?
I mean, it's not even a lot of foresight. Actually, 10% of small businesses have any succession plan at all.
Wow.
Just nothing. And I do think that spreading that message that there are exciting ways to not only build leadership but to change ownership. That's all I know about how to do that. Let's pass it on.
Well, we had some commonalities there because we also started with ICA, except we started as an ESOP, not as a worker co-op. And also, I didn't want to be CEO. So, in terms of Deirdre, I can relate to that. Some of you may know me as, I'm the CEO and president now at Gardner Supply. Didn't intend to be, but I am. So I will talk about the succession. We're a little bit further down the road in terms of numbers, but I've been at Gardner Supply 40 years, and I do say we do expire at some point, and I'm at my expiration date. But I'm also really involved nationally in the employee ownership movement. I believe in wealth equality. I believe that this is a way to fight the battle of private equity, venture capital. I do worry that everybody's going to go that way. Even ESOPs are selling at the same rate they're being made. And I know that those people make a lot of money at that time, but then what? The next group doesn't have employee ownership, right? So I'm very much about how do we have more legs to this employee ownership movement for the people that become employee owned. So I'm very much involved nationally with the ESOP Association. I'm now the past chair of the Employee Ownership Foundation. So I think about these things. I was the founding chair of the Vermont Employee Ownership Center. So back 22 years ago when Don had that seedling of a thought. So I really think about this topic of employee ownership very broadly. And so we can talk about that later, but I'm going to tell the Gardner Supply story. So I just want to start off with who we are. Many of you may already know, but a lot of people think we're just a retail store at Williston or in Burlington. Actually, 75% of our business is online. It used to be a catalog and through the mail in the 1980s, but we are only 25% of our business is retail, although we are growing retail. We just opened another store in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So we were founded in 1983. So we spun out of a nonprofit called Gardens for All, and we became a for-profit at that point. So back then we were a catalog company, but now obviously we're both. We have 5 retail stores now. We have the Intervale was our first store. Williston was the second that we purchased, and we purchased Lebanon, New Hampshire. We're now in Hadley, Massachusetts, and we just closed in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I'm going to the open house this evening, actually. So we have about 260 employees and 150 seasonal employees. We are in season right now. Hopefully you all know that because you're all gardening. We also have a distribution center in Milton, Vermont, 120,000 square feet, and we have a manufacturing facility that makes our raised beds, garden carts, light stands, that kind of thing up in Georgia, Vermont. You may not have known all that, so fun facts. And our ESOP started in 1987, and we did not become 100% until 2009. So when we talk, I'll go through our history about why that is. But I did want to share, I always think it's fun to share what our missions and what we are, because this mission statement we have had since the 1980s, and it still holds true. We just went through our strategic plan and didn't change a word of it. We are in the business to spread the joy and rewards of gardening, because gardening nourishes the body, elevates the spirit, builds community, and makes the world a better place. And I love it. And there's not a thing we changed when we went through our new 10-year plan.
Wish we could find one like we've changed ours 12 times in that time.
Yeah. I love it. We did change our vision a little bit to be the nation's most trusted retailer, providing tools, advice, and inspiration for everyone, everywhere, to become a more successful gardener. It was really the everyone, everywhere that we kind of added to it, because we are really trying to help the starting gardener. A lot of people look at our site and think, oh my God, I have to be a master gardener to be on this site. We don't want to be that. We want to be that for all, not just the master gardener. We created this year some values around accountability, integrity, passion, optimism. You can all look at that. Our executive leadership team actually came up with them, and we went through all the getting the words right about each of these values. But what we then did, and this is where employee ownership comes in, is we went out to every area, every department, and had them create the behaviors that they want to have in service to our values. And it was a really great exercise. Our head of HR did it with every department. And so now you'll see the values in every department, and next to them the behaviors that each of them want to have. They'll all be a little slightly different. A call center person is different than a manufacturing person is different than a retail person. And we wanted them to have a connection to these values in their own way. So I just thought I'd start off with that. So let's talk about employee ownership. We also started with ICA. But our founder was in his late 30s when he started the ESOP. He was about wealth equality. And he had a few, I just put up a few sort of trigger points about our employee ownership. It is a transfer of ownership, and it's about retaining great people and having wealth with those great people, having a culture of shared ownership. And it is a retirement benefit. But I'm going to say one thing about this ESOP thing. I have to be on my soapbox every so often. I don't think we should talk about ESOPs as a retirement program, ever. Because yes, you can say the younger people don't even know, what is retirement? Well, don't talk about it as a retirement then. Because if they stay for 10 years and they leave with $150,000, that's awesome, isn't it? And they can roll it over into a retirement fund if they want to, or they can take it out and pay the taxes. And if they pay a penalty, so what? Right? Like, so let's just talk about it as wealth. It's about wealth, equality, and getting wealth in the hands of all, whether you stay till retirement or not. But our founder had a few other things. He really felt like if we had an ownership stake in the business that we worked in, that we'd be more productive, we'd care more about our work, we would contribute daily to the ideas of how we do our jobs. And I always say that if you think as a CEO, I know how to make a pickpacker a better worker, that's not true. And I think that CEOs can, or managers can think that they know all. They don't know all. I don't know how to make it better for them. They have to say it. They have to tell us if their printer is printing once every 7 seconds, it needs to be once every 2 seconds, right? I happened to work in the warehouse during COVID because we went crazy busy. As you can imagine, everybody gardened. So I was shipping in the evening. And that's exactly what was happening. Every time I shipped, I had to wait 7 seconds I went out of my mind. I videotaped it and I sent it to the IT person. I'm like, what the hell is this? Why isn't anyone saying anything? And it's because they got used to it, right? It's ridiculous. I can't even imagine. I went through I said, how is this happening? How did people not come to us again to say that this is an issue? Anyways, a quick thing on our ESOP path. So we started in 1983, owners in his late or mid 30s at that point. We started our ESOP working with ICA, 30 participants. Now, we did not jump to any tax incentive piece. 30% was the place you wanted to be if the owner got a tax incentive, still is. But in our case, that wasn't why we did it, right? So we just did it as we could afford to. We didn't make a lot of money back in those days. So if we had $50,000, we bought $50,000, that might have given us 1% of the company. So over the 12 years, we just bought bibs and bobs as we could afford to. And that got us to 19% as of 1999. So we did our first, we didn't get to the 30% until that point. We did a leveraged ESOP. We borrowed from the bank. And that was the first time that our owner was able to take advantage of any tax incentive. So you can see the motivation was very different. 2006, we paid off that loan. We went to 45%. And now we're at the age where Will is now at retirement age. And now we're talking about ownership succession. So in 2009, we went to 100%. We had 225 participants. Instead of us being a C corporation, which means taxed at the corporate level, we're now an S corporation, which is taxed at the shareholder level, and an ESOP is tax-free. So we do not pay taxes anymore, income taxes. And that was leveraged through the bank and the founder. So that just gives you a little history about how we did it moving along. So let's talk about succession. So 2009 hits, and now Will is ready to retire. So you have Will in the center, and they talked earlier about Senator Welch. Will passed away in December is what he was talking about when he talked about Will and the impact he had on our community. It was unexpected and super sad for all of us. So we just had a celebration of life last week. On this side is Jim Feinson. He is who actually replaced Will as CEO and president. I'm going to talk about him and then me to follow after that. So when we first talk about our first transition, we had Jim Feinson. And he came into the company, he stayed with the company for 35 years. I'll have been 40 years, right? So he's a youngster, I started 5 years before him. So he became the product manager, director of marketing, COO. And it was really at that point in time when he was the COO, I was CFO, where Will said, which one of you wants to be the CEO? And I was like, not me. I'm not the one that wants to do that at all. I don't want that responsibility. And Jim went up the ladder and became president and then president and CEO. The part that we didn't talk about, John, is what were the difficulties with this new internal person who'd worked, and now you have relationships, right? You worked 35 years with Will, Jim did. And Will had been our CEO for that many years, or whatever there was to the time he retired. And for us, it wasn't so pretty sometimes, because what happens to employees when they get no from the new boss is they go to the old boss. And that was happening. And Will didn't stop it, really. He was all in it. Well, I have a great idea. Why aren't you going forward with this? And so there was this side thing going on with our succession. And we had to really nip that in the bud, which is that Will had to stop. And the problem with Will is that he was such an innovator and so engaging in so many ideas all the time that if someone came his way, he was going to run with that idea too. So it really took us probably a good 4 to 5 years before we sort of straightened out the relationship of Will. And because he was just such a dynamic personality, and he wasn't a rule follower. So for him to follow the rules, like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so he was a chairman of board, but it really did cause some conflict. So I don't want to not mention the things that were really difficult changing over from Will to Jim. I was, head of HR and finance at that point. So, I was really trying to help work with that and work with people to not go that way. And also there were times where people had to leave. They couldn't work for Jim. They wanted to keep working with Will. Well, sorry, Will's not here anymore. You need to move on. And sometimes that did have to happen. So, I'm a little bit of a different story because Jim came in, Harvard MBA, he had all the, all of the credentials to come right in as a manager. I, at the time after I graduated from college, and he just needed a job, and I took a job at data entry at Gardner Supply. There was nothing to read about Gardner Supply. It didn't exist. I started the day that they had spun out of the Gardens for All. So it's not like I knew I was entering this really groovy, great company. No, I didn't know that at all. So I didn't have that advantage, but very early on, you had the influence of Will, and here you had this 35-year-old person that was just brilliantly and wanting to improve the world through gardening. We just did a celebration of light. He was always ahead of his time. He, came up with WaterWise catalogs when nobody was worrying about water, but they're worrying about it now, aren't they? So he was just a brilliant man. And so it was very early on. Everything was coming through the mail then, and we started to get letters from customers, but we didn't have anybody to answer the letters. So I started to answer the letters. So, and then we had to hire our first person, and I said I'd do the interviewing, and then I became HR, and then we had to do our first budget, and I said I'd do it on Lotus 1, 2, 3, and I became finance, and we just got bigger, right? So, so I was a self-taught, but it was Will who saw something in me. And he saw that in everybody. He saw where you were strong and pushed you in that direction. I had a mentor for my finance side. She said, "Do you think she's got it in her?" The mentor said yes, and off we went on the finance side. And Will wanted a human finance person. We were in open book management. How do you talk to employees about finances? Maybe the best thing was that I was who I was because I didn't know any better myself. So I had to learn it myself and then be able to be out there teaching to our employees and communicating and helping them to understand in a way that they could understand. So we just got bigger, and then over time, ultimately I became the chief operating officer, taking over the contact center. But I came up. Remember, Jim came up the marketing, merchandising side. I came through on the operations side, so I was head of contact center, manufacturing, the distribution center, inventory control. So I came up that direction, and Jim and I were paired almost perfectly. He was the CEO at that point when I was COO. He had marketing, merchandising, and retail, and I had all the rest of it. And we were very tight. So when it came time for him to leave, all of a sudden the board was like, "Well, you have Cindy, and I didn't really go there. And but like Deirdre, it was an obvious choice that it was me. I think I just didn't have it in my own confidence that I thought it could be me. I always just felt like Jim brought, the Harvard MBA, he was different than I was. And so that ultimately is what happened. And I moved up into taking over marketing, merchandising as Jim and I started the transition. I went into that, you do president and CEO. I went into the president role, took on marketing, merchandising. He kept retail and strategy. And then I ultimately moved into that CEO. So that's all fine and dandy when we talk about succession of going from one to another. But what happens, we were all internal, right? So it's a bit easier when you have all that institutional knowledge and then you had people who kept taking things on. But then what happens when now my replacement? So I'm retiring in the next few months. I did stick some traits in here because I think I did this for another one before I moved to my successor. It's just all the traits that I think are super important as you're looking for people that are the right successors for you. Who are the people that are out there working hard, trying to learn constantly, complete dedication, that they're also looking for mentors? How are they always better? I have my HR person's always like, "Oh, I met with this person, this is what I'm thinking." Like she wants to be better all the time. I think be humble. We are not the smartest people in the room. We're just smart. So hopefully we're smart. But be humble. And I faked it till I made it all day long. I mean, for many, many, many years, because that's what I had to do to get there. I had to just say I could do it and then figure out how I was going to get there. Who are those people that are doing that? Who's striving to be better? Who's encouraging others? You want them to have good leadership traits. Never think you know everything. Constantly stretch yourself and acknowledge where you need more work. I do think that also as looking for new leaders and successors, we need emotional intelligence. We are in employee-owned companies. We are not looking at the bottom line and we don't care about people. We care about our people. We want to be the best employer that we can be. We want emotionally intelligent leaders, not just intellectual leaders. So I have a successor, and our successor came from private equity and venture capital. We hired her 5 years ago. She worked for a company, some of you may know hayneedle.com. She entered that business when it was around 30 million. Ultimately, it sold to Jet and then to Walmart.com at $500 million. So she had been there all through that growth. So she had she was a merchant. She was a merchant, home decor for Hayneedle. And then all of a sudden she's sitting at Walmart going, I do not want to be at Walmart.com. And she didn't get there by choice. But she did come from Hayneedle that poured money, and she said we would light money on fire and throw it off to get the growth that they needed, not profitability. That was all about growth. And then she said, I want to look for a company, a smaller company that maybe I could be the CEO of. So she moves from Omaha, Nebraska to Burlington, Vermont. And so that was 5 years ago. We recruited her as VP of Merchandising, knowing that she had interest in being a CEO, but we needed to get there, right? So eventually she oversaw both marketing and merchandising as our executive vice president, and now will be my incoming president and CEO. So I thought I'd just go through a little bit about our successor planning. We planned really 2 years out for her and I to prepare, and then we've been much more aggressive in the last year. We did hire a facilitator, somebody out of Stowe that helped us, and it was to try and get a timeline in, but we also did a whole piece on what were my fears. I've been here for 40 years. What were my fears about leaving? And how did I want to leave? I didn't want to leave as a lame duck. I didn't want to, all my fears about leaving. And then her fears, and what's our excitement too, but her excitement and fears about going into the position, following someone who's totally enmeshed in the employee ownership world, and she's not. And, there were all different things that we talked about and shared, and it was actually a wonderful session and broke down. She's very different than I am, and how she presents herself. And it was a really great place to bring us together and say that throughout this entire process, we are going to be kind. We're going to only say good words about each other, and anything that we need to work on will be there, but that we are going to be out there with our organization 100% behind each other. And we did it. We're doing it. So, finding the right person. So we've got Rebecca, is her name, comes in from Walmart, right? Like acculturation. How do you acculturate somebody that comes from such a different environment into this company in Vermont that's employee owned and as will improving the world through gardening, and we're donating money to all kinds of things. So she had no experience with employee ownership. But one thing on acculturation that I'm going to tell a story about, and that is that when some of you may have been around when Ben was trying to buy back Ben and Jerry's before Unilever ended up buying them, but he was trying to buy it back. And so we had him come and meet with our leadership team and asked him, what did he learn about that process? And he said, what I learned is that with Ben and Jerry's, we brought in all this outside talent. And remember, Ben and Jerry's, you would die to meet with an HR person. Like to tell me they had the graphics, they did the grooviest things, and Gardener Supply was like a puppy to them. Like we couldn't wait to meet with them. And he said, but we brought in all this outside talent and we never acculturated them. And he said, and in the end, when you lose your soul, who are you? And of course me. I'm like, I start crying. I'm like, oh my God. I ran home. Within a month, we had a document that was called The Soul of AGR. AGR is our America's Gardening Resource. And we created a document because I was like, how do you know? How do you know if you're not in there? And so we don't use this document for anybody except our new employees that come in. And we show the soul of AGR because we only do orientation twice a year. So most of them have been there a little bit before they go to orientation. And we look at this document and say, as new employees, because all of us are jaded once we're here for a while, as new employees, where are we on and where are we off? And it's our guiding light, because I don't want to be the person that says we lost our soul because we brought in talent that didn't understand who we are. So Rebecca goes to, I don't know if any of you have heard, the ESOP Association has a program called the UPenn program, the University of Pennsylvania. It's a CEO program for ESOP companies, a week in July and a week in December. She came back, and the one worry I had is how is she engaging with employee ownership? Like she says the right things, she's, people love working for her, all that, but she didn't get employee ownership. She went in that program the first week. Those CEOs, you bond. I went on it. It's fabulous. Went bonded, and she came back and she's like, "Oh my God, our founding fathers were doing employee ownership. Why isn't everybody doing employee ownership?" And if you knew her, she's not emotional like me. She started to well up. I stood up out of my chair, totally disrespectful when I think about it now. I go, "Oh my God, you finally got it. You finally got it." And I like high five her because she's crying. And I'm like, about employee ownership. But she did. She finally, really in her body, got the importance of employee ownership. You have to make sure that the people you're bringing in, people who asked about how do you find outside people, you find it and then you work on acculturation and then you make a decision. Are they going to make it or aren't they? And the board needed to see that also. She did it. She got there. And it's super important. So the other is preparing staff for transition. You have Jim, who was there for 35 years. You have Cindy Turcot there for 40 years. Big employee ownership person, right? How do we prepare for my departure with all staff? I gave a year's notice as we prepared for the transition because we had to hire Rebecca's replacement. You know, and some people, it was really hard for them, you know, to imagine that I'm not there anymore. But I'm sure there's people that can't wait till I leave. But but the reality is you need to prepare your staff. Don't drop a bomb on them. Like, let's get them ready for this transition and have them be a part of the transition and keep them apprised all the way. So when we had our annual meeting in February, at the end I facilitated the whole thing, but at the end we had a fireside chat, so to speak, with Rebecca and I. Rebecca talked about what she's doing and honored me, and I talked about her and honored her about what she is doing. So we're preparing the staff for the transition. I already said this, support each other throughout. Make sure we're using good language all the time about each other so that we're both successful, me leaving, her coming in. Know when to leave. I actually am leaving sooner than I thought I would because Rebecca's replacement we thought would take longer to find and that they'd be outside of Vermont. Of course, they lived in Vermont, which was awesome. And now I don't need to stay as long as I was going to stay. Know when to leave. And I feel super great about the new date that we've set because I know I'm going to be sprinting till the end. I'm not going to be like, oh, okay. You did it a little different. You were polishing the mirror. I'm like, no polishing for me. I'm out of there. So I think I want them to polish the mirror. And we're also in the middle of a strategic plan, you know, an update to our plan. And in the fall will be their time to do it. And it's better if I'm not there. They just need to do it. And then the celebrating the ending and the beginning. I'm all about celebration. We'll celebrate me and we celebrate Rebecca coming in, and that we just keep it as positive, and she'll be my MC for my ending because she's the person coming in. So we want to make sure her voice is who's leading the end of me, but the beginning of her. So that's my story. So we have a little bit more than where you are. We're a little further down the line. I was the Deirdre. Well, maybe Jim and I were the Deirdre, and but now we're bringing that outside person in. What?
You were the Deirdre.
I was the Deirdre, right? Jim wasn't. Yeah, I was. And but so and there's not a lot of employee-owned companies that have gone through now and successfully gone through. And I believe Rebecca will be successful in being that fourth person that's been the CEO of our company. So, all right. Questions? Yes.
How did you go about making the decision to get an external hire and go through that acculturation process? Did you have backup plans? Did you try looking for someone internally? Like, how did you make that?
Yeah, we didn't really, and our leadership team, you know, you just burned through two with me and Jim. So, you know, we didn't really have the next layer because, you know, our leadership team is our IT person. We have a head of retail. We have our HR person, but there wasn't a natural leader in that. And we, when our head of merchandising left or was leaving, retiring, we had to bring in talent. We didn't have that talent internally. So when we were looking for that talent, because it's so much about who we are, having the right product, that we at the same time put a little note in there to say, and there's potential for growth to a bigger position. So we actually advertised it that way. So the people we got had that interest in being more than what that position was. So I think that was the difference for us. That's really how it happened. And we had to bring in her replacement mainly. Our chief marketing officer passed away a year ago. So we didn't have that person available to us, so we had to hire her replacement externally also, who's awesome. And so we have an amazing leadership team now, and I actually do think within that group there might be a Rebecca replacement, but we had to build up that bench strength by replacing our CMO and replacing me, and then we have a really awesome IT and head of retail. So we have a lot of good talent, a higher level talent than we've ever had. So we'll see what happens after Rebecca. We got that like 10-year thing yet on there. Because she's also mid-50s. So same thing. There will never be another person that worked 40 years or 35 years or 50 years. Go ahead. Sorry.
I loved your story about the printer and the 7-second delay. That was really powerful. I'm wondering what lesson you actually discovered after you honed in on that question of why didn't someone bring this up further to me, and whether you would recommend the kind of diagnostic you were able to do because of COVID. You were forced into that role, but I think it's an ongoing challenge for a lot of leaders that what they think is going on is not actually what's going on, and the speaking up. They want everyone to speak up, but that doesn't mean that people speak up. So what did you learn about that?
Yeah. Well, one is our IT systems have been, we have had a horrible, we did an upgrade that was just horrible, and it's not gotten better, and we're now moving to a new system in August. But we had to hire the talent to take the spaghetti and straighten it all out again and figure out what was the right direction. We didn't have that talent to do in-house, so we hired just a higher level person, and so that when that happened, because in the warehouse, like IT never stopped by to see what they needed. If they was always trying to do it over the phone, and I'd be like, send somebody over there. Like, I'm a hands-on person. So once we had that person in place, they now have somebody going over there at least once every couple of weeks so that we're fixing things. But when I videotaped it, I knew I was sending it to someone who could do something about it. In our past, we didn't know what to do about it. Our systems were so sucky that we didn't have any light of how it could be fixed. So the 7 seconds is still there right this minute. Until we go through August, it's still there. And I was there 2 years ago, right? There's nothing we can do about it until we make our move. So unfortunately, even then, but at least somebody was paying attention to them. And what happened is they just became complacent because it's been so sucky. Like, why would I can't ask them. They're not going to be able to get it done. So you have to then change the model, which is we hired somebody that could help fix our problems and get there. It wasn't an easy one. It was really terrible. And there were a couple others like that. And the others, we need to be in there sometimes working. We do at the end of, I'll say one other thing, sorry. At the end of every season, we have the whole warehouse team sits in a circle with the merchant and with the COO, and they just go around and say, what problems do we have that were product related, and what products are in our own warehouse, and so that they create a list of fixing things. So we do that, and it's a really powerful exercise. Unfortunately, the 7-second one needs a system change. So, but that is a really powerful thing to do, to meet with your warehouse, and we do the same, have done the same with the contact center too, because they're hearing all the complaints about the product. What if the merchant's not hearing it? How do they know?
It is too, is this on? It is one of the powerful things about open book management too, is that as you empower people to be responsible for financial performance, they get even more observant than they were, but they're always observant. It's just that we don't always hear it. And open book management, the back and forth, really does give that potential for constant improvement.
And now when they have IT there every other week, they're now all of a sudden they're seeing things get better. They were told their warehouse couldn't be wireless. I'm like, what do you mean it can't be wireless? Everywhere's wireless. It's now wireless. Like, they're starting to see action, but we needed the right leader to help make those changes. Jason?
So you both spoke about being, I don't know if transparent's the right word, but open about an upcoming succession. And John, it sounds like in your case you were open, maybe even with the whole staff about that. But, my concern is one about being open about an upcoming succession if you don't really know where you're headed. You haven't picked the successor. Does that uncertainty offset the benefit of being open about the need?
So in our case, we were not fully open until we had a plan. Everybody saw me getting older. They knew I was leaving sometime, so there was always that. But it wasn't until that time in 2019 when we finally arrived at a plan that that was endorsed by the entire company. That was put in front of the entire company and endorsed as a plan.
We also I did not give notice until we had our plan in place because we knew, I don't know how it couldn't have gone down if I didn't. But then again, I mean, I don't know how you do it if you have to hire for the CEO. If you do not have the internal person in place, you might have to, the plan then would be, we're gonna be looking for a CEO. That would be your plan, and you would tell people, at some point you have to tell people because you're advertising and you're interviewing and all that. But that would still be a plan, wouldn't you say, right?
Yeah,
That would
that's
still
a
be a
plan.
plan, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree, and and because the staff, they definitely will respond, in some way, right? Like people were like, I didn't know you were at retirement age. I'm like, I've been here 40 years, do the math. Like, anyways, go ahead.
Did you find, either of you, that, I know we had Deirdre, who was the reluctant leader, and you were the reluctant leader. Did you find that you had, team members who were very excited to take on these roles, but they were qualified and, or, like, leadership skills, and so,
That other people were interested?
yeah.
So people who wanted the job and weren't right for the job. Did everybody hear that question? Yeah. I mean, we definitely have some strong leaders, some really great leaders, but no, there was never anybody. I mean, there are all kinds of leadership positions coming along, and generally people have a pretty good sense of themselves because we have a very strong evaluation process, annual evaluations, and there's also this evaluation for ownership that basically our feeling is if somebody is not material for ownership, whatever that means, meaning somebody that you trust, somebody that you want to share ownership with. It's a fuzzy thing. It's an emotional thing. Then we want to lead them out the door in the first 5 years. Doesn't matter how good they are at what they do. So that process self-selects, and then the evaluation process, people really know what leadership thinks about them and where they need to improve and get a constant feedback.
I'll add one more piece, which is our board was really involved in mine when I became. So when Jim, he had talked with the board about his departure, they were very much a part of wanting it to be me. So, which was actually really good for me, confidence-wise, that they had that faith in me. So I think your board of directors is super important in this process. If you have an active board of directors in also identifying, because they also see the talent, and they've got all this outside experience, so they know what a talented CEO looks like, and or at least in our case. And so they know, we go to board meetings every quarter, so they know the talent within the room. So that is another place that it happened.
When you made your actual transition, how did that timeline work? Was there a time where you set dates that this is the day that the new person is in charge? Was there a timeline where you kind of both had your hand in the pot? What did that look like?
For Jim and I, we went to, sorry, you go. I'm talking.
There you go. Finish.
All right. So with Jim and I, I started to take over some of his reports, and when we made the transition, when I went into the president role and then CEO. But with Rebecca, we talked about, when we told staff when I was going to be leaving, I just gave her my first person. I'm leaving in a couple months, right? The next ones will start to happen in the next few weeks, and we'll work together with them all the way through till I leave. Was that your question? Yeah. So we don't have a lot of crossover. She's been full on getting her chief growth officer up to speed and doing their transition. And she's just about done with that, and then we'll make our transition. So, but everybody knows it's coming, and we have a timeline, but we're not making any change. And so she doesn't do one-on-ones with them. You know, she can have conversations with them, but we're being very clear about that they were still reporting to me until they're not.
Yeah, and same, we distributed responsibilities and built capacity for years and years, and my responsibilities diminished, especially as the company grew. But I was the CEO and the president till the last minute, and the next minute she was 100% the CEO and president. And so my agreement with them was to work up to 8 hours a week and to serve on the board for 2 years. But I have zero responsibilities. And it was really interesting listening to you talk about Will and getting out of the way. And if Deirdre was here now instead of me, she would be telling some of that. So, you know, when you are a strong leader who's been a leader for a really long time, it's a fun process to distribute that leadership, but it is really hard to back all the way out of the way. And our leadership team helped me a lot to do that. And they were very, we did, that was one of the processes we had to do together, is get me out of the way.
I'll add one other piece, which is that our staff meetings and our board meetings are in this changing. You'll see the dynamics starting to change, and it's purposeful. Then in the last board meeting, where I facilitate the meeting, but you can see the amount that Rebecca's doing versus me is increasing. And so that's, and the same at staff meetings,
Same,
where all of a sudden
same.
we're starting to be conscious about, again, we have monthly staff meetings, that what she's doing versus what I'm doing. Same with our leadership team, which is a broader group. She's starting to do more of the exercises with leadership on visioning or whatever, and I'm backing off. So it's kind of this, you're starting to see this change. And then for me, it'll be the day I leave.
I think that motion with your hands, that really is like the key to the process, that there's this ascendance, and then, except that maybe it's more like this. You know,
And not so much for me. That would have been true for Will, but not for me, because I'm all in. I have this full, she hasn't taken any of my work yet. Like, I'm full in, you know, so I'm in a, you know, she's the next 6 weeks or 8, whatever, a couple of months will be that way, but, and then I'm over and out, and I'll be on the board too. So it was that way with Will. It was not that way with Jim and me. Yeah. Yes.
Could I hear both of you say a few words about your boards, how you set them up, who's on them, are they paid boards?
they're totally different. So you go first.
Okay, so we're very formal. We actually only have 3 board members, and that was just because legal board members. And that was because we were really scared to be at ESOP and have more external board members than internal, but we really wanted the expertise of the external. So we originally had the founder, the CEO, and 1 external. And we figured the founder had a foot on both sides. But we've since changed that to being 2 external and the CEO. But we have 5 advisory board members. So even though they don't have legal responsibilities, they come to the board meeting, you would not tell the difference. They have the same, they yell at us, they positive, whatever it is no different. And the only reason we kept it at 3 is just easy when you're signing stuff and that. I mean, really, we could be 5 and it'd be fine, but they're all paid board seats. And the legal board members get a little bit more just because they've had the fiduciary responsibility versus the advisory board, but because they all do the same amount of work, they're quite close in compensation. The chair makes a little bit more because the chair meets with me, and he's my boss. And so he has more time that he's spending with me. So he gets paid a little bit more. So we have a total of, we had maybe 4 on there. And one of those is an ESOP rep. So that would mean we've got, other than me, about 6 people that are either legal or advisory board, but they're all at the meeting. And our board meetings are quarterly, and we have our management executive leadership team comes to those meetings and maybe a special speaker, depending on what we're wanting, what we have on the agenda. Does that give you enough about our structure? Okay.
So as a worker co-op, we have no outside board members. Every board member is an employee. There's an exception to that because we are a Massachusetts beneficial corporation, and part of the beneficial corporation law is that you must have a benefits director who is not an employee of the company. And so our benefits director is a local friend and lawyer, and the leadership of South Mountain writes the benefits report every year, sends it to him, and he signs it. So that's his only role as a board member. So the board is very much the leadership of the company plus more. And the board meets once a month, the leadership team meets once a week. The leadership team brings proposals to the board. It's very enmeshed.
Just so, if there's any of this kind of thing that any of you want to talk about after this, I'll be, we're both available. I think in terms of, you'll have our information there, and once I've retired, you'll see what my personal email is, so you can reach out. But I think we're both, I think I can say this confidently, that both of us want all of you to be successful in how you do your transitions or how you set up your boards or whatever. I regularly get phone calls from people just asking just questions about how we do something, and that's what I am committed to doing for the rest of my life, to help people be successful in this. So if you do have questions that get sort of specific, that you want to talk to either of us, right?
Same,
Yeah.
absolutely, but I want to mention one specific thing. So for many years, people would ask us for this document, our operating policies, our bylaws, how do they set up? And we got to the point where we would share anything, because we learned that there was no harm in sharing it. In fact, it was all positive. And then at a certain point, we got tired of fielding the same request over and over again. So we just put everything on our website. And if you look at the document section on the South Mountain Company website, they're all there. So, and for anybody to use.
That was a good thinking.
It really worked. And the other day I'm working with a new worker co-op. Heather, you know them, in North Carolina. What's their name? Starts with an E. Equinox. Yeah. And we're planning a day-long workshop in the fall. And I said, well, send me all your stuff. Your bylaws, your operating manual, whatever else you have, decision-making matrix. And she said, well, it's going to be very familiar. It's just going to look like yours. Because, when those models are there and you don't have to reinvent the wheel, it's really valuable. So we have found that to be useful.
I saw the keynote afterwards, and I do at the end of every staff meeting, I do a Cindy thought, and I thought his thing on conversations was super interesting. And I was like, I am totally stealing it. And I'm open about that, and I hope that you all steal too. I guess steal sounds negative, but
Yeah.
Copy is a better word.
Borrow.
Or copy.
Employ.
And we're all good.
Use.
Anything
Yeah.
else that we can, I know we're at 12:30, anything else? All right, well, we're here if you want to
Well,
talk.
thank you so much.